Hello, you guys. My name is Lauren, and for those of you guys who don't know me, I am a part of the T-Rock shepherding team, and I'm just so glad that I get to be with you guys tonight and get to share a word. They charged me with a 10-minute message the last time they did that. I went for an hour, so let's hope that we can do a little better this time. But I hope that everybody has come into this room. My biggest prayer every week that we get to meet in this room is that hearts and minds will be open to hearing what Jesus has to say and to do in your lives. And I hope that you guys did that tonight. And I hope that you're here with open hearts and open minds. Those are not the right sides, so... Okay, she's got me. Tonight we're going to be talking about the altar. The title of the sermon is At the Altar, and we're just simply, briefly, hopefully deeply going to be talking about giving your life, your things in your life to God at the altar. And so the message is kind of going to be broken up into two different parts, getting to the altar and then staying at the altar. And so for the first part, we're going to talk about getting to the altar, giving your life to God. And the first point is that at the altar, you should expect alterations. I think that a lot of times we come into walks with Christ, and we either think that we have to be all perfect, and so it's I've got to get myself ready and get myself fixed in order to give myself to God, or we expect to be able to give ourselves and our lives to God and continue in the same pathways and the same things that we're doing. That was a lot of my story. I lived a lot of my college life being a Christian and giving my life to God, but living a life of my own. And so for the beginning of the sermon, I want to go just through a few. Throughout the whole Bible, there are dozens and dozens of stories of people back in that time who were not great people, and God changed them, and in giving their lives to God, they were able to be saved, and their lives was altered. Their lives were altered, but for great things. And so the first story I want to talk about is Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector. At the time, for those of you guys who don't know, tax collectors were kind of looked down upon because what they would do was they were there to take your taxes, but then they would also charge people more and say that it was a part of their taxes, but they were pocketing that money. And so when people found out, they were not liked. They were very frowned upon. And so in this story, just kind of a backstory before we jump into the verses, God comes to this town. He specifically calls out Zacchaeus by name and says, I want to meet with you. The people around him are like, why is this holy man coming to meet with the most unholy of people? And so in Luke chapter 19, verses 6-10, it says, Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. And so this story spoke to me, one, because Zacchaeus literally is humbled immediately in front of God, gives himself at the altar and says, God, I'm giving my life to you. I will repay every debt that I've stolen from people, that I've taken from people. I will pay back every wrongdoing I've ever caused. And in return for that, he does that because God offered him the gift of salvation and the gift of forgiveness. And so because of that, God says, you're saved. I'm here to heal you. And, and so the ending of that verse also spoke to me of when it says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. I think, again, and we'll talk a little bit deeper in just a minute about it, I think, and I'm super passionate about this, anybody who's around me they always joke Lord knows this, but we are not here to make ourselves perfect to give to God. God is here to save us in the unholy places that we're in the deepest of deeps that we're in the hardest of hearts that we're in, and bring us to life. We don't need to try and fix ourselves to God, because here's the reality of things is you will never be able to fix yourself or make yourself as good or holy or whatever it may be as God can. And so God wants to meet you. Literally in this verse, it says, for the Son of Man, Jesus, came to this earth to seek and save those who are lost, not to save those who are already saved. And so I think keeping that in mind as we go through not just tonight, but our daily lives of giving ourselves to God in every single circumstance, in the times where you feel like you're so alone, like nobody knows what's going on, you're going through the depths and the hardest parts of your lives, God is there to save you in those. The next story we're going to talk about is the woman at the well. Again, for those of you guys who don't know, back in that time, there was kind of two groups of people. There was the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans were like the unwealthy people, kind of like they were looked at as like the scums of the earth. Nobody dealt with them. Nobody wanted to be with them except for other Samaritan people. And then the Jews were the people who kind of had it all together. They were the good people. They were the people who lived the holy life. And so Jesus is at this well. This woman comes. This story is kind of funny to me. And as I was reading through it, I didn't include it in this, but at the very end of the passage that I read, Jesus kind of calls her out because this lady was kind of like, I don't know if you would consider her a cheater, but she had like more than one husband, and Jesus called her out for it, and he literally looks at her and he's like, go get your husband. Oh, wait, you can't because you have 5. And just like really humbles her. Like, I can't imagine being face to face with Jesus, and that's what he has to say to me. But in John 4, verses 7 through 15, it says, soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? Jesus replied, if you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you the living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket, she said, and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob? And in my head, I'm like reading this, I'm like, I just wish I could like slap this woman. Like, if you only knew you were literally talking to Jesus and you think your homeboy Jacob's better, but okay. And so now I've lost myself. Oh gosh. Do you think that you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed? Jesus replied, anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them and giving them eternal life. Please, sir, the woman said, give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. And here's the thing, again, Jesus meets this woman, like literally, he's like, right after this, he's like, go get your husband. Wait, you can't. You have 5 of them. Like, you got to go track them all down. And so Jesus met her in a time where she was in a deep time. She was not liked by people because they knew what she was doing. And she was lonely and come to this well to get water. And Jesus meets her at a time where maybe we wouldn't think that he would meet us at, but it was one of her lowest times, and he meets her there, offers her this gift of life. And because that, she's changed and her life has changed. And it goes back to the point of he meets us there, but we have to expect that if we meet him at the altar, he is going to alter our lives. And I'll talk about this a little deeper, but in this passage, she ends up going back to her community and brings everybody to come see Jesus. And we'll get into that a little bit, but just to show the impact of Jesus met her when she wasn't in a good place. He saved her. He brought her to a better place. And because of that, she was able to impact those around her. And then finally, one of my favorite stories from the Bible is the story of Saul to Paul. Saul was a persecutor of Christians. He was literally killing people for worshiping Jesus. He had gotten like the okay, I guess, from the king at that point to go to Jerusalem, where Christians lived and worshiped, and was okay to go and arrest these people. And so he's going. He hears Jesus out in the street, like this light shines down and he becomes blind, and it's a crazy story. And we're going to read it. In Acts 9, verses 13 through 18, it says, "But Lord," exclaimed Ananias. And so at this point, Saul has seen and heard God. He's fallen to the ground. He's blind. God sends him out to a place where he's alone. He hasn't eaten for 3 days. He can't see anything. He's literally like in the loneliest time of his life. And God calls somebody named Ananias to basically go and bring the word of Jesus to him. And so the verses say, "But Lord," exclaimed Ananias, "I've heard many people talk about terrible things that man has done to the believers in Jerusalem. And he is authorized by the leading priests to arrest everyone who calls upon your name. But the Lord said, 'Go, for Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to kings, as well as to the people of Israel.'" Which I want to stop there because that's absolutely crazy. And I think if you would look in today's world of God's calling a prisoner who's literally killed people, not only killed people, but killed people for worshiping him. And God's like, that's the man I want to use to bring my word. That's crazy. And so he says, "But the Lord said, 'Go, for Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to kings, as well as to the people of Israel. And I will show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake.' So Ananias went and found Saul. He laid his hands on him and said, 'Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road, has sent me so that you might regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit.' Instantly something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he got up and was baptized. Afterwards, he ate some food and regained his strength." And so this, I purposely put this story as last, one, because it's my favorite, but two, because I think that it's just so powerful of when Saul finally hears God, he literally becomes blind. Things go over his eyes and he's completely blind. He's led into this lonely place, not because God was punishing him for what he had done, but because of his own actions. And because of that, he had to suffer. And when he sat and suffered, because we were all born into this world as sinners, Jesus sent somebody who was a Christian, and maybe that's you, that God is sending to go and lead somebody else to him. And so God sends Ananias, literally heals, scales completely fall off of his face. He's now no longer blind, and he in turn comes to be one of the biggest professors of God's word, and goes and brings other people closer to him. But had he not gone through the deepest of deeps, and had God not met him at his deepest moments, he would not have been here today. And because he gave his life to God in those moments, he was able to be changed for good. Maybe he didn't see it at the time, because I can only imagine God striking me down and being like, "You're a sinner, I'm going to make you blind." What? Okay, this God's supposed to save me, and he's making me blind. And then when he went through that suffering, stood by God no matter what, God ended up healing him. And so the biggest point of all of this is that we don't need to change to accept Jesus. I think that, again, that's one of the biggest misconceptions in our world, is that we have to be to some certain level to be able to gain salvation from God. That's not the truth at all. We don't need to change to accept Jesus, but when we step into a real relationship with Jesus, we ought to expect our lives to change. And that's just the truth. And sometimes it hurts, and sometimes that means I'm giving my life to God, and God's telling me this boy's not good for me, or this girl's not good for me, and they're not leading me down a right path. And how do you navigate that with God? And maybe sometimes and this was for me, of you're not in a good friend group. You have friends that are not leading you closer to God. They're leading you the opposite way. How do I navigate that with God? And there were people, when I gave my life to Christ early on in my college experience, that God, was you've got to get rid of this. And I did, and it was hard. And I went through really lonely seasons. And it was hard, and I was lonely. But because of that, I've been blessed with great friendships, and I get to be a part of a church community that loves me so well. And I have built so many best friends from this place. And had I not stepped in the changes that God wanted me to make when I gave my life to him, I wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't get to tell the story of my life. I think one of the biggest moments that God changed my life was, for those of you who don't know, I'm a 6-year senior. I'm not proud of my college journey by any means, but I'm here today. I'm about to graduate in May. Hopefully, we're crossing our fingers. And so I have not had an easy journey, to say the least. I was a freshman when COVID hit. It was really hard. I was a really sheltered kid in high school and middle school, and I had never experienced a party in my life, and I had never experienced like alcohol or anything. And so I moved out and was on my own, and it was like I learned what a Four Loko was, and it was crazy. Oh, it was crazy. And so in the time of COVID, and now, like, not only am I like I love to go and party and do all the crazy things. Now I'm like stuck in my room all the time. Like, what else do I have to do with my life except not do school and just waste my life away? I wish, like, looking back, I'm like, I wish that I could just slap that girl and be like, what are you doing? And so one of the hardest times of my life was in the fall of 2022 semester, it had wrapped up. We were going home for the winter break, and I was actually here in this building in the Now Connections room. It was our big office at the time. I was an intern at the church. My life was falling down around me in shambles. Nobody had any idea, or so I'm sure some people probably had ideas of what was going on, but I thought I was hiding it really well. And I had gotten an email from the school, the dean I was in the College of Education at that time. And he was like, hey, we need to meet with you. Your grades, I had previously like a hearing to put me on academic probation. So they were like, if you don't get your grades up, you're getting booted. And I didn't get my grades up. And so I had this meeting, and I'm like about to go into what's supposed to be like the most happy time. And it's Christmas lights and gifts and Jesus and all these things. And I'm like, literally my world is crumbling around me. And so I ended up, from that hearing, getting put on academic suspension. I was not allowed to be a student at Tarleton for the spring 2023 semester. And I was like, I don't know how I'm ever going to tell my parents. I was extremely close to our pastors here at the time, Nick and Joe. And I literally went to them and I was like, I do not know. Like, my parents are probably going to stop paying my rent. I'm not going to be able to afford to live here. I can't move back home. Like, do you have an open bedroom for me? And as the supportive Jesus parents that they were like, absolutely. But through that, I was just where I should have turned to God and where I should have been like, okay, I'm wrong. I need to go. I need to look for a better life. It was not over for me, unfortunately. And I remember the spring semester coming around, and I hadn't told my parents yet that I was not in school, and they had called me and were like, how's your first day back? And I was like, it was so good. Classes were great. And I literally was not a student at this time. And they're like, I was lying my way through, and I was content, and I was positive that I was going to lie my whole way through that semester and not tell them. And fast forward, we had went to like a lead team dinner with our leadership team here at T-Rock, and we were at a restaurant, and Pastor Nick had looked at me and he was like, you really haven't told your parents yet? Like, you should probably do that. And as the pastor, he's like, you probably shouldn't be lying to your parents about the fact that you're not in school. But I was like, no, it's fine. And I went home that day and just broke. I was at my breaking point. I was at the lowest time of my life. I had an extreme alcohol addiction. I didn't know how to find happiness without alcohol. I was surrounded by horrible friends, people who did not encourage me in great ways at all. And I broke down, and I called my parents that night, and it was not good. And I was they were not financially funding me anymore, and rightfully so. They didn't want to talk to me, and rightfully so. And it was hard. Like, it broke me. I have a brother. We're 8 years apart. I basically grew up as like the only kid in the household my whole life. And so my parents and I's relationship were not always the best, but I was close to them because it was just me and them. And so to hear like that my dad didn't want anything to do with me and was mad at me, and rightfully so, they had paid for me to flunk out of college. All of this to say, in that moment, I was in the deepest time of my life. I was, again, just struggling with alcohol. I was having self-harm and suicidal thoughts. I did not want to be on this earth anymore. And that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And in a moment where it could have gone a completely wrong way, Jesus met me and saved me. And because of that, I've been able to get back and I got my life back on track. And the summer after that, I got the opportunity to go and work at a summer camp and get to tell kids about Jesus all summer, and I got to come back, and I've gotten the opportunity to get to serve our leadership team here, and it's been beautiful, and I'm back on track in school, and I'm making straight A's, and it's all wonderful and great, and my parents are going to be so proud when I walk the stage in May, but all of that to say, it was in my deepest times where God met me, and I had to make the choice in that moment of there's going to be life change, and I cannot... I say this all the time to people around me. I do not believe that alcohol is bad. I, for the most part, cannot go out and consume more than like one alcoholic beverage. Not because it's a terrible thing, but because I have struggled with it before. It's been something that God has humbled me to, and it's something that I had to give up in order to walk in a close relationship with Christ. And that was something that I had to be content with, saying, God, here's this. I'm done with it. And it wasn't just like... For me, for the longest time, it was like a struggle of, God, I'll give you this or I'll give you that. But I'm going to keep this close to me because I have too much fun with this, or it's too hard to give this up. And at that moment, it was like, I have to give God everything. There was nothing left that I could hold on to that I had like a tight grasp on. It was all or nothing. And God took me in the most broken time of my life and saved me. And it's because that I get to be here today and share my story with you guys. And so I urge you, if you have not made that decision, give it all to Christ. It is worth it. It is more beautiful, joyful, peaceful than you could ever imagine. And it's hard to see in the moments. And I'm saying that as somebody who's been there with you in the struggles of addiction and in the struggles of identity loss and not knowing who I was, and in the struggles of like literally like at the lowest of lows, not wanting to be alive anymore. And that is where God saved me. And it was hard to see in the moment that there was anything that could have gotten me out of that hole. But when I gave it to him, he did. And he provided. And if you need proof that it happens, I'm here and I'm living to tell you guys that. And so we're going to jump into the next part of the sermon, which is staying at the altar. Once you've given your life to God at the altar, it's not something that we just like get to, and I think like this space in a lot of churches is like, come to the altar and give your life to Christ. I think that it's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful thing to see people come up here and give things to God every single week. But you yourself have to build a personal altar for your life. Maybe it's not physically, but a place where you can go and give it to God every single day, because it doesn't just stop with the time or the place that you give your life to God. It goes through the rest of your life, and there will be days where you feel like you've gone astray and you've lost it all, and God still wants you to come back and give it all. And there will be days where you've had a great day and you have everything to worship God for, and he still wants you to meet him at the altar and give it to him. And so the first part of this is in being able to stay at the altar is practicing preventative prayer, not emergency prayer. I think that this is something in our age group where it's like, oh, I have this test today. I need to go and pray that God will let me pass, even though I haven't studied and I haven't done anything to prepare, but I know God's got me. Sorry, like he's got you, but like you got to also prepare yourself, right? You can't just trust on him to provide when you've done nothing to provide yourself. And so in 2 Chronicles 7, 1-3, it says, when Solomon finished praying, fire flashed down from heaven and burned up the burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple. The priests could not enter the temple of the Lord because the glorious presence of the Lord filled it. When all the people of Israel saw the fire coming down and the glorious presence of the Lord filling the temple, they fell face down on the ground and worshiped and praised the Lord, saying, he is good. His faithful love endures forever. And so the thing that I loved about this story was that it wasn't when like bad times were coming. And every church, I'm sure every temple, every gathering place of Christians have its hard times. And there are times where it's like we're down on our faces seeking God because where else do we turn? And I'm sure that these people did it, but it also starts with preventative prayer, praying that God wouldn't put us in those circumstances, that once we've given our life to him, that God wouldn't allow us to go back to friends that maybe lead us astray or would help us to get out of relationships that aren't good for us. And so it's not about just praying in the times of need. It's praying in the times of high where you maybe have like no needs. I think everybody has needs, but praying in times where maybe it feels all good, that God would keep you there. And there will still be times, even when you pray those preventative prayers, that God will put you, or you will be in times of lows. And we should still seek him out there. But I think oftentimes we forget to seek out God even in the highs and even when things are going good. We tend to like come up here and kneel down on our knees and open up our lives to God whenever things are going terribly wrong. But then it's like the moment that he fixes those circumstances and things go right, we want to get up and walk away and be like, thanks, God. See you next week when that test rolls around for that class again. And I need more prayers to pick my grade up because it's already dropping low. Or, thanks, God, for helping me to get out of this friendship. I'll see you later. Whenever it goes back downhill again or whatever it may be, we tend to get down on our knees and open our arms in prayer and reaching out for God when things get tough, but then we don't want to stay there when things get fixed and when they're at the highs. And that is what God wants from us. He wants us to be there at the lows, but also to worship him in the highs because he's the person who brought us there. And so who are we to not worship him in the things that he's blessed us with? Second is that your altar will alter others' altars. I've seen this dozens of times in my life, that I've had friends or people around me who they've built up their altars. They've given it all to God in every single day, in the highs and the lows. And because of that, I have been able to be affected and learned from them of what does it look like to give God everything every day. Whenever we heard the story about the woman at the well, she runs back to her community once she's found salvation in God and brings others. And it's like, hey, this man's here. He just saved me. Come see. I want you guys to experience the same thing. We see it in the story of Saul and Ananias. Because he was a believer, God was able to use him to bring salvation to Saul. And it's the same thing in our lives. When I was going through those really tough seasons, I had some roommates. I loved them dearly. We were all in a terrible time of life. We loved to go and party together. Our house that we lived in was like right down the street from the Rock and Peace, so we could literally like walk there, get wasted, and walk home. And like we didn't even have to worry about the cops catching us because we were literally right down the street. And so we were in these deep, dark times. And whenever I chose, and God came to me in that room that night and saved me. And when I chose to give it all to him and to say, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want a part of this anymore. I love you guys and I want you guys to stay in my life, but I cannot keep going out. I cannot keep making these choices because they're not leading me to good things. And when I chose that, I got to see one of my best friends. Her name's Karis. She is an amazing friend, and we were both in a really terrible time. And when I stepped away, she started coming to church with me, and she found her own relationship with Christ. And now I get to see a reflection of what her life looks like. And she reminds me daily of like whenever I sometimes get in the moment and don't want to go to the altar because it's too hard, or I forget to go to the altar because it's so good, I am able to look at her and see a reminder of like, this is what it looks like every day. I had a dear friend who she came to T-Rock. She was I got to walk through life with her from a really deep, dark time in her life and see her life radically changed by God. And unfortunately, she, in 2023, lost her life to an incident that was out of her control. And it was a terrible time. I remember like seeking out God and being like, why is this happening? But what I can remember from Allison's life is the person that she was and the way that she loved God. And I remember telling one of our staff people here, we had went to visit her in the hospital when she was they knew that she was going to pass on from this earth. And I remember sitting down with Miss Terry at the hospital when we had went to visit her and telling her, like, I'm sad to see her go, but I can say without doubt that Allison was running into Jesus' arms whenever she passed from this earth. And I pray that I get to be that to other people, because I pray that I think that if you are a Christian, that should be your biggest prayer, that you get to live out a life that others can look at and say, they're at their altar, I want to be there too. They're giving their life to God, I want to be there too. And as Christians, it's not always just about like, hey, do you know Jesus? Those are some of the hardest conversations, and they're so uncomfortable, and they're important, but that's not what it's all about. And Allison and I very rarely had those conversations, but from the way that she loved Jesus radically, she knew. And I will never forget one of the last conversations we had it was one of our last T-Rocks of the semester, and she had called me. There was some stuff going on, and she hadn't been coming to church. And she had called me that night and was like, life's going crazy right now. I'm going to come to T-Rock because I need to be there, and I need to be in a place where I feel comfortable to give this to God. And we got to sit together that night, and it was one of the last times that I ever saw her. But that's what I will remember of her, is seeing her give everything to him. And I pray that we all live out those lives, and that once we give our lives to Christ and we get to see life change in our lives, that we would be able to be that for others. And then lastly, order determines capacity. And so once you've kind of given your life to Christ, this is something that you will learn. Hopefully you know it and are able to practice it before you have to learn it. But in Genesis 26:25, it says, "Then Isaac built an altar there and worshiped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well." And the thing that spoke most loudly to me in this verse was that we see Isaac go. He had been taken out of a place that he lived for reasons that were out of his control. And so God brought him to a different place. And when he got there, the first thing he did was set up his altar, because he knew that that was the most important thing. Before he had built his house, and before he had set up camp, and before he had set up things like a well to get water that he had to live with, he set up an altar because he understood the importance of our relationship with God. I've seen it a million times in my life, and I think that we all have that. The thing is that we get blessed with these beautiful things, and maybe you're blessed with, I have my fiance's sister is extremely smart. She is on a great scholarship at Tarleton. But because of God, she had that, and she's extremely smart, but without God, she would not have been able to get to the place where she was able to achieve that herself. I have an amazing relationship with my fiance, James. He's an amazing man. We get to chase after God together. We get to serve the church together. But I'm not blind to the fact that if God was not first in my life, that relationship would not be healthy. And if God was not first in my life, we would not have made it to this point, because days get hard, y'all. And I love James to death, and I feel like have a extremely healthy relationship, and there's still days where I just want to choke him out. Okay? I'm just being real. But if God was not at the center of that relationship, I probably would have already, okay? But because God is at the center of the relationship, we get to come together when times like that arise where I'm like, you're really making me frustrated right now. And we get to look at that and be like, we're a team. God has put us together. How can we approach the problem? It's not about us against each other, but it's about us and God against the problem. And how can we attack that problem with him? I say it all the time and people laugh at me. And I was speaking about this to our youth kids not that long ago of I love James, but I'm okay without him. And God has got me without him. And I'm whole without him. And I love getting to live life with James and love getting to live life with my friends around me. And I do feel like God has blessed me with amazing people. But if I was left with just me and God, I would be okay, because my identity is not built in my relationship. And when I came to Christ, he blessed me with a beautiful relationship. And I get to take part in a relationship that I love and cherish dearly. But without God, I would not have been able to last this long. Without God, we would not have been able to grow and go through these problems together. Without God, I would not be able to have overcome the situations and the challenges that I do at school. Without God, I would not be standing here today. Because if I had not put him first, things would have piled up and he would have been left at top and kicked out of the door. And when we look at it, it's like, wow, but that happens far too often, is we pile up these things and allow God to just kind of slip out the door because we have all these things that we have to deal with before God, and we're not turning to the person who created all of these things in our lives and blessed us with all of these things. And we don't know how to handle things because we're not looking to the person who created them. I wanted to share with you guys, I'm sure maybe some of you guys have seen, I saw this analogy on Instagram Reels, and I thought that it was great. Let me not break this. And so I wanted to share it with you guys. I thought that it fit really well, and it was just a great physical representation of what we're talking about. And so in life, a lot of times our life looks like this, and it's filled with beautiful things that are great, and sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not, but it's things that we hold dearly to our lives. Maybe it's school, sports, relationships, whatever it may be. We have these things that we hold dearly to our lives, and then we like to put the big things on top, right? And it's like, well, I have these friendships and these amazing things that are in my life, and I want to hold these close, and then my relationship gets put on top, and then school gets put on top, and then here comes God, the biggest thing of all, and he gets put on top, and he doesn't fit. And so then we don't make time, and maybe that looks like, and I'm speaking from a humbling heart of I need to be better at this myself, of like, there's a million things in my day to do that oftentimes I don't get to my Bible time because I get to 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock and I've been so busy that day that I don't have 5 minutes to give God. I do, but I'm choosing not to because I'm so tired, and these things are coming before the biggest things. And so our life looks like this, where oftentimes it's like, I can't fit God in. God, I'm busy from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Where am I supposed to fit you in? Because I also got to get sleep, right? And so we go through life with this of like, God sitting on top, and sometimes he fits and sometimes he doesn't. And if we wiggle it the right way, maybe he'll slip down a little bit, when life really should look like God is at the bottom. And these important things like my relationship comes at the bottom as well, because that's somebody that God has put in my life to be in my life for the rest of my life. And so God comes first, that comes second. Maybe something like school or sleep for some of you guys maybe comes last. And then we put these other things on top that God has blessed us with. Promise I practice this. And they fit. And they find a place to fit. Maybe these ones don't, because, God didn't like them, or that boyfriend was too gross and God kicked him out of your life. But they fit because we put God first, and God was at the center. And sometimes the rocks get kicked out, and sometimes they get changed out for things that maybe weren't good before. And God is going to bless us with something 10 times better, because we put God first and we trusted in him to be the number one priority in our lives. We cannot, as Christians, continue to go through life without putting him first. And that doesn't always look like, okay, the first thing I have to do is read my Bible when I wake up. I'm somebody, that's the thing that I like to close my life on. I like to close my nights with, because I've gone through hectic of the day and dealt with my problems and other people's problems, and I work at a place that isn't always happy-go-lucky all the time, and I want to rest my eyes knowing the truth of God. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's things like fitting time in to go and speak with people about Jesus, getting to share the word with people about Jesus. Whatever that is, we've got to put God first to be able to experience the capacity of what God has. The altar cannot be optional in our life if we want our lives to be optimal. Think about that again. You cannot make the altar an option if you want your life to be optimal, if you want to live out all of these beautiful lives. We expect to have these healthy relationships without putting God at the center of them. And then we wonder why didn't you make this good? Well, because you're probably chasing after him before you were chasing after God. And then you're like, God, catch up. Come on, jump on the bandwagon of this relationship. And God's like, what are you doing? Or you're chasing after maybe these career dreams that you want God to fit into. God shouldn't fit into your dreams. You should fit into God's plan that he has for you. And that's the truth. And if we want to live a life of beauty and a life of all of these different things that we as a society claim that we're running after and that we dream of, then we've got to do the things to get there. And what are the things that we have to do? Put God first. Let him be the center of your life. Let him be the center of your relationships. Let him be the center of the daily choices that you make. I told Chrissy 2 weeks ago when Taylor asked me to speak this message, we were going through a church fast. I tried fasting from social media. It lasted like 30 minutes. It was not good. I'm not good with it. And so I told Christy, I was like, I really feel God telling me that I need to fast from sweets and sodas. And like, I've gotten to a point in my life where it's like, I literally feel like I have to have a sweet treat and a Dr. Pepper before I go to bed every night. And I was telling her, I was like, sometimes I'm sitting there like eating a honey bun and I'm like, this is disgusting. Like, why am I even eating this? Because I feel like I need to do it to be able to sleep all at night, and that's not the truth. And so I did, James and I did a 1 week fast, and it was, I'm going to tell you, absolutely miserable. And God showed me that there's a place for honey buns and brownies and Dr. Peppers to fit into my life, but I can live without them. And he fulfills me more than any of those things. And it seems so silly. And I remember sitting at a meeting with Miss Terry. She's one of our staff people here, and she mentored me for a while, and she gets to pour into me a lot, and we would meet weekly during the summer. And she told me, she was like, Lauren, sometimes I really have to pray over like if God wants me to eat that Snickers bar in the middle of the day, because I know I don't need it, but like maybe I do. And so it's hard and it's silly sometimes to think about, but let God be in every position and every point of your life, because when you do, he will provide a million times over. And it seems silly to me of like, God's called me to give up Dr. Pepper and sweets. But in that, like, I was miserable, but in a great way, because it showed me that I rely so much on these things that God fulfills more than anything. And again, there are places for sweets in my life and Dr. Peppers. And I don't think now I'm out of the fast, and I don't think I've gone a day without a Dr. Pepper and a sweet treat. But I look at it in a different way of like, I don't need this. God provides before. And so I pray, and we're going to pray and then get back into worship. I've taken way too much time. But we're going to pray, and then we're going to get back into worship. But my prayer for you guys is that you see the need in your life for God, and for God to be in it, and then to be first in it, and to be in the center of every single day life. You see for the altar in your life every single day. And so we're going to pray. We're going to get back into worship. This place, like nothing about this area up here is special, but it's an altar provided for you to come and lay down things in your life. And if you need to do that tonight, come, lay down things. Nobody's judging you. If you need somebody to pray with, if you're going through hard things that you don't understand how to navigate, neither do I, but I would love to pray with you through it. And maybe it's something that I've been through, and we can give advice, or things, tips of how we've gotten through it. Whatever you need, we're here for you. We love you. We want this to be a place where you experience Jesus, and we want it not to just stay in this place, but to go out and for you to experience Jesus. And because you've experienced Jesus, the people around you experience Jesus. And so I'm going to pray. We're going to jump back into worship. We're here. The altar is here. Come, lay down whatever you need to. If you have not given your life to Jesus, I pray that you would do that tonight. If you want to talk to somebody about what that looks like, I would love to have that conversation with you. So if you would bow your heads with me. Dear Lord, I just thank you.